everyone, we've worked with strings like for 100%. Like with the stuff we've done so far, we've definitely worked with strings. You know, the data type where you can store words, store sentences, whatever. Right? We've worked with it, but I think in today's lesson we're going to be going over more specifically the different types of things you're able to do with strings, and we're going to try to solve some questions as well. So we did assign homework last time. I think the best, we're gonna go over it like one by one. We've removed one of the questions. I think, wait, is it the J2
Yeah,
from
because
2020?
yeah, because we felt like it may be too challenging because that particular J2 for that year was quite hard. And on top of that, like Dmod like has like the incorrect like test data for it. So like when you try to like test out your program, it basically will never work. Yeah, so we've just taken that off. So if you've done it, that's really good. But for today, we're not going to review it. And yeah, so we'll get started right away with the first homework question.
Yeah. So I believe the first one was this next in line. It was a J1 from 2013. Let's just talk about it first. So it says, you know, a family with 3 children, their ages form an arithmetic sequence. So an arithmetic sequence is just it's just a series of numbers that, and there's a certain pattern behind those numbers. So it says the difference in ages between the middle child and the youngest child is the same as the difference between the oldest child and the middle child. So it says, for example, their ages could be 5, 10, and 15. So if you look at 5, 10, and 15, that is an arithmetic sequence because the difference between 5 and 10 is 5. The difference between 5 and 10 is 5, and the difference between 10 and 15 is also 5. So we know based on the differences between those numbers, that is an arithmetic sequence. It says, given the ages of the youngest and the middle children, what is the age of the oldest child? So let's look at some examples here. So it says one of the sample input says 12 and 15. So of course, the oldest child is going to be 18 years old. And if it's 10 and 10, well, there's no difference between them. So of course, next, the other child is going to be also going to be 10 years old. Okay, this is just some of the test code. I'm just gonna delete this for now. Okay, so based on this question, do you guys have any idea what the first step might be? Any suggestions? I think this is just, it's very standard, like you're gonna try to find difference and then try to use that difference to find the oldest child. So any suggestions on what the first step might be? So if you have any yeah, take input. So in this case, what input would this be, James?
An integer.
Yes, it is. Okay,
Yes,
so let's say youngest equals like that. Yeah, and the middle we're going to have to take 2, right? And they're both integers. If you look at see, it's 12 and 15. They're both integers, and we're going to both take inputs for both of them. So what might be the next thing we have to do after we've taken 2 inputs?
Difference.
Yeah, difference. So how do we calculate the difference?
Like n minus y.
Yeah, exactly. So m minus y. So this is simply, you're just taking the middle child and then you're subtracting the youngest child. So we know the difference. After that, like what is, there should be a, you know, like after we find the difference, what do we do with the difference?
You do difference plus middle is equal to oldest.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll just call it O equals middle plus difference. So O equals m plus d. Yeah. And now that you have the oldest, of course, everyone knows you should just print it out. I think you can shortcut this by just saying print out m plus d, but like this is also fine. Just print out the oldest. So we can, this should be it. We can test some cases. 18, yeah, that is correct. And this tricky case. 10, 10, 10. Okay, yeah. and you can submit this. So on Dmod, just on the top right corner, submit solution, and you copy and paste it in, and make sure it's Python 3 because that's the correct version, and just submit. Yeah, all the test cases are correct. So yeah, James, you single-handedly carried that one question. Good job. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to Austin, who's going to do the next question.
Yep. So yeah, so wait, I think this is the wrong one, Andrew. Yeah, all right. So I think that's the right one. All right. So okay, so I guess I'll explain this in depth. And then if anyone has any solutions, as usual, they can send their like Replit link into direct message to Andrew or myself, and we can take a look at it. But for now, I guess I'll just explain. Yep, James, is that a question?
The chat is fully disabled.
Oh, okay, all right, all right. Can you send a direct message to us though?
No.
Oh, okay, all right. Let me. Okay,
I just enabled.
okay, it should
I
be
enabled.
now. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So while I'm explaining, you can just feel free to send a link. All right. So you supervise a small parking lot which has n parking spaces, and then the problem reads: yesterday you recorded which parking spaces were occupied by cars and which were empty. Today you recorded the same information. How many of the parking spaces were occupied both yesterday and today? All right. So this is a very simple like string processing problem. So what we have to do is basically loop through both of the string inputs given, and then we just have to check if they equal each other. So if C, or sorry, if they're both equal to C, because we can't check if they're both equal to each other, because if they're both like that empty dot, then obviously that doesn't work. So we have to ensure that they're both equal to C at the same index position. And obviously I guess we just print out how many spaces were occupied both yesterday and today. All right, so yeah, so this should be relatively simple. So I will delete what Andrew has up here. And yeah, so we'll begin. So firstly, is there any like, does anyone have any suggestions on what we should do first? Any suggestions? Input from the chat, James. All right, yeah, that's completely correct. So yeah, so we have to deal with input first. So if we take a look at the question, we have to input an integer first, and then we have to input two strings. So we can just call our first our input num. Some spaces there, so we call that num is equal to input. Okay, and then we have to have two variables to store our string inputs. So let's give them meaningful names. So we know that the first line of input, we can call that today spots maybe, and then we can make that equal to a string input, and then we can call our second input yesterday spots. Okay, so that looks good now. So is there any suggestions on what we need to do next after we've taken care of our input? Do we have any suggestions? Okay, so I guess I'll just take care of this. So our next step would be to create a counter. So we need to create a counter to store the amount of spots that were taken up on both days. So let's create a counter right now. So let's call that counter, and then we could set that equal to 0. All right, so now what we need to do at this position is just to process both of the strings at the same time. So this is something we'll learn today. So what we will do is we'll create a for loop for I in range as we've learned before in last class. And what we can do is we can actually, we don't really have to use the length function because we're already given like the number of spots in total. So we can just put that right inside there and put a colon. So once we've got into this position right here, now we can start using something called slicing, where we're going to slice through each of these strings and compare like the individual characters. All right, so what we can do is we can write today. So we can write an if statement. So if today's spots I is equal to C, let's probably best use double quotes here, and yesterday's spots. So if that is also equal to C, what we can do is we can add 1 to our counter. And yeah, so that should be good. And finally, let's take a look at the output. So yeah, so we just output the counter. So spots that have taken up on both days. So we can just write print counter. And yeah, so that should be it. So let's just put some test inputs in there. So from that, we should get 1. Why? Because C appears both on the second index area. So as you can see, the first index, we have C, we have empty, but then on the second index area, we have CC. So that's when we know that we have to add 1 to our counter. And as you can see, the rest do not align with each other. An empty position is matched with the C. We have 2 empty positions, and then we have another C matched with an empty position. And so, yeah, so I think we're done with this problem now.
Okay, do you want me to submit it?
Yeah.
Again, top right corner, submit solution. Yeah, and it works because it says all the test cases are correct. Okay, so I think we're done with those 2 questions. We can move on to today's lesson. Okay, so for today's to-do list, we're going to talk about what strings are, firstly, and also about how the different things we can do with strings. So I think Austin Ma just showed you how to slice through strings, right? You iterate, you look at every individual character with a string. What he did in that problem was he used loops and he went through every individual character and compared the 2 strings together. So that is one method that you're going to learn. And you're going to learn other methods, and we hope that at the end of class, you're going to be able to use some of these different methods that you can do with strings and use it in J2 problems. Okay, so first let's talk about what strings are. So I think we've covered this in the first, I think, no, the second lesson when we talked about syntax and we talked about different data types, right? So strings, they're just another data type. We have integers, right? You can store numbers. But when we have strings, you're able to store different characters. And you can store a sequence of these characters. And usually when we have these a sequence of characters, they usually form a word, or they usually form like a sentence, right? That's the most common way to use strings. But for example, in Austin's case, when you looked at parking combinations, those are just a bunch of random letters, random periods like mixed together, right? So I think overall, like it is like you will have words and you will have sentences, but sometimes you will also just have a random combination of like symbols and characters. So it isn't just limited to words and sentences. So strings and integers, probably the 2 like most commonly used data types. We've already talked about integers in a lot of math questions, and I think today we're going to talk more about strings. Okay, so let's briefly talk about how we use strings. I think most of you guys should know this because I think you've watched enough of us Austin and I coding, like to know that like the basic how to use strings. So of course, to show that it's a string, you would need quotation marks. So you can have single or double. It actually, like in reality, it doesn't really matter. They both show that they're strings. And in this case, when we say string is equal to hello, we are over here, we are assigning a variable, right? We're assigning this variable called string, and it has a value of hello. So that's simply what this means. And at the bottom, we have print string. So of course, when you print this, it's going to print hello because that is the value of the string. So this should be very intuitive. So if you want to declare your strings at the very top, this is how you would do it.
Okay, so what is slicing? So slicing is like a really important concept, especially when we deal with strings. And it's basically like the concept of manipulating strings, perhaps like making a substring. So what that means is cutting a string or manipulating it so it's a bit smaller, or we're just looking at certain sections. And yeah, so slicing is when you refer to like smaller sections of strings. And basically the syntax of slicing is we have our string at the start. So as you can see, we have an example here. So S, and then we have a bracket, and then we have a start, colon, and end. So for start and end, these are going to be like integer numbers. So for example, if we want to start at H in hello, we can set start to equal like 0, because we all know that indexes start at 0 and progress onwards from there. And let's say we want to stop our substring at like L, right? So as you can see in the example, so we only want E and L. So we can set that to equal 3. So 1 and 3, that will give us E and L. So one thing you just have to make sure, and which is just a really common mistake when you first start dealing with strings, is that the end index is not included. So when you say end, you're cutting it off right there, and that specific index will not be included. And yeah, so so as you can see, there's an example here. We have string is equal to hello. So if we print string 1 colon 3, we will get E and L. So the string index at 3 will not be included. Okay, yeah, so negative indexing. Yeah, so negative indexing are slices that start the slice from the very end. So this happens with negative numbers. So as I said before, you can use integers to deal with slicing. That includes negative numbers. So for example, let's say we want to print out LLO. We can use that by writing -3, and then our end index will just be empty. So that'll tell that'll just automatically default to 0. So we'll stop at like 0. So yeah, so this is just another example. And usually I don't think negative indexing is too common in programming, because it's just much easier just to use whole like positive numbers, as it's much clearer. But if you do find yourself in a position where you have to use negative indexing, you do have the option to do that. All right, so this is probably like pretty similar to stuff we've done before. So how do we get the string length? So we can use the len, or many people just directly like to call it length function. So what you do is you just write len parentheses, and then within the parentheses, you can just add whatever you want in there. So whatever string you want to find the length of. So let's say if we set string is equal to hello, we can print len, and then in parentheses string, and then that'll print out the length of the string. So I think Andrew can demonstrate that, so we can go into Riplet and then maybe just demonstrate that. So
okay. Just trying to get over it. So if you want to demonstrate string length, then I think you would have to assign, I think first, let's just take a random input. This might be different, but so if the string is just something we manually input, and we say let's say we have a string Austin 6, because there are 6 letters in Austin. So that's how to, and this works for since we're taking the input of any string, this would work with any string. So Joyce had a question. So would print string -4 to -2 be the same as print string 1 to 3 for hello? 1 to 3 goes from to L. -4 to -2 goes to, I believe, E to LL. We can definitely show this. So if I have a string, let's say string equal to, okay, we have any string, and we say we print the string, we index it. So of course 1 to 3 would give you, so if it's hello, it would give you E to L. We can definitely show you. This is negative indexing, if you guys remember from the slides. So if you say hello. So I think this goes back to what Austin, like we put it in bold words because I think it's just that it's important to know that the last one is non-inclusive. It's always going to be 1 minus. So to answer your question, Joyce, yes, they give you the same thing because one is non-inclusive. So of course, like indexing, from the forward direction, or you're going from backwards direction, like there's going to be overlap if you do it correctly. So yes, in this case, you would have the same thing. So this is basically the same as going from -4 to -3, right? Because you're going from 1 minus, the last one is non-inclusive, like Austin mentioned. Sorry, was I lagging? If I was lagging, okay, so I was just saying that the string, in this case, it would go from -4 to -3 if you're negative indexing. So I think I would say like this is like you use it in different contexts, I guess, but I think it's more straightforward to use this. Like it's more confusing if you go from the back end when you can conveniently do it from the front, right? So those are differences, but yes, they can give overlap. Let's just head over back to the slides. And the next is about check string. So check string is just simply if you're checking if certain like parts, if certain, like in essence, it's just checking if a string is in another string, right? Because if you look over here, it says you're checking if this section exists within the large one and large sentence, and of course it does exist, right? Because if you look at what I'm highlighting, there are different instances where the letters AIN exists within sentence, because we're checking if this is in sentence, right? I just have a second example. So James just pointing out the second example. I think one of the other I think there's another weird example, but I did not write that, but it's just saying. Okay, so in this case, it says X is equal to Andrew is a cool kid, and if cool kid is in X, so if these letters exist within X, then it would print yes. If it doesn't, then it would print no. So I think it's very logical, right? You're just checking if certain like letters exist in other certain combination of letters exists within a larger string. Does anyone have any questions up to this point with what we talked about so far? I think the beginning part, most of you guys should know about it, but I think check string, maybe not, like string length, maybe not, but it should be relatively simple. Okay, so Joey says, I'm just pointing out you're not a kid anymore. It really depends on your definition of a kid. Okay, but I'm not going to talk about that now. Okay, so okay, Austin. Okay, let's move on. If no one has any questions. Okay, so combining strings. So I think the main term we use in Python is concatenate, or like it's the same thing as combine. So basically, if you have two strings, you are able to combine them into a third one. We can definitely demonstrate this because somehow there's no output for this. So if I say A equals B, there is a certain problem with this. If you try to combine it, C equals A plus B and C. So one problem you will find is if you run this, just say is not cool. But then that's not the main problem. But the main problem, okay, so I was talking about there's a main problem because over here there's no space in between. So if you want to combine two strings, you have to make sure that there is a extra space. So I'll go into here and put this extra space in there. So just if you want to combine strings, be mindful because it will literally put the strings right next to each other. And what might happen here is like there's no space between them. So that might be a little troubling. So in this case, it actually works because I put an extra space in between. So in this case, it works perfectly fine.
Okay, so reversing a string. So this is something you guys really should pay attention to, because I think reversing a string is like an extremely important thing to understand and know how it works, because through reversing a string, you're going to be able to like do a lot more things, such as like, process a string from the very back. And in like CCC and like string problems in general, manipulation of strings really starts from understanding like everything you can do with like a string. So yeah, so if you want to reverse a string, use the index brackets and then colon -1. So that will just automatically help you reverse a string. You can also reverse a string manually, such as like looping through it. So you create an empty string and then you set up a for loop, and then you can loop through a string and basically from the very back, and then just add that into like a new string. So you can also reverse a string with that method, but obviously just simply just using the brackets and then negative colon -1 is just so much more simpler. And you would obviously want to create like you should, if you want to preserve the original like input, maybe like create like a new variable to store that in. But if you just want to directly replace it, as seen in the slide, you can just set like the same variable to equal the added change, or like the brackets and then colon -1.
Okay, so I have a question. Wait, okay. First one from Joey. Why would you need to reverse? I think like in specific questions, like competition questions, they might ask you, it's a very like, it might be a very dumb question, like find the reverse of like whatever sentence we give you. So like it's not really useful, right? Like outside of like in real life examples, like if you're coding for like a project. But for competitions, like they might like have a question similar to this. Okay, yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, so additional methods part 1. All right, so there's also like many other methods you can use alongside, for example, like len length to find like the length of a string. There's also two pretty important methods that deal with the case of a character. So we have a lower method and there's an upper method. So very self-explanatory. You can just write string.lower, and that automatically makes all this the characters when that string lowercase, and then vice versa for uppercase. So yeah, that's something also to keep in mind. These methods are all designed to help you out in the case where like a string problem wants you to like manipulate a string, which also involves like the case of the string. All right, so additional methods part 2. All right, so the strip method is very, very useful. It helps you remove any white space from the beginning to the end. So if there's random spaces within your string, you can say, for example, string.strip, or in this example, a.strip, and it will just remove all the spaces within like your string. So that's very useful as well. The replace method replaces a string with another string. So basically, if you want to replace h with j, then you can just write a.replace h with j, and then it will replace the first occurrence.
Okay, this is the last part about strings, and then also I also have a question from Alina, and we can talk about that afterwards. So additional methods, this is the last part. So this is like more onto like, because next lesson we're gonna talk about lists, and lists specifically, like you can actually change like strings into lists. So in this case, using the split method, when you split that string into a list, you're essentially turning the string into sub elements within a list. So if you look at the example, it says a equals hello world, and but between the hello and the world, there is a space, right? So essentially what the split method is doing is it is looking at that space, and then it's splitting up the two words into separate elements in the list. So we're going to talk more about lists next lesson. And I just have a question from Alina. She says, how do you count vowels in a string? So for this, I think it's definitely, we can definitely take a look at that right now, because that is an interesting question.
Yeah, so I think what we can even do is like go into REPL, and we can just like we can do that problem right now.
So Yeah, Austin, do you want to do it or do you want me to? I can.
Yeah, I guess we can, yeah, I guess I guess you can do it and I can explain what the process is to do it. All right, so we can start off by taking a string input. And all right, so our job is to count the amount of vowels. Okay, so we can take in a string input. And then what we can do afterwards is obviously create a counter to store the amount of times we count that there's a vowel um within like the string that we're given. And then what we can do next is we can just quickly set up a for loop. And we can the range will just be the length of the word, since we'll take a look at each individual character. And yeah, so what we can do afterwards is we can like use like we can just say string bracket I. So if string bracket I um okay, if string bracket I is in, or we can just write in. We don't really need to use the keyword is. So in, and then what we can do here is set up a string of vowels. So what if you guys could remember like our second class where we went over syntax, in is a very useful keyword where we can actually check if a certain character is in a string. So we can just create a string with all the vowels in there, and then if that is true, obviously then we can just add one to our counter. So counter plus equal to one, and then we can just print out the like the counter at the very end, and we can test that. So let's have a pretty simple input. How about we can just say Z and A, or that works as well. So Z A, and then we know that there should be only one because A is the only vowel inside there. Yeah. So I hope that makes sense.
Basically, you're basically looping through, and for each individual letter within whatever input you have, you're checking if it is contained within the string. The string has all the vowels. So you know that if it's not in the string, then it's not a vowel. But if it is in the string, it is a vowel. That's why you increase the counter every single time it's in the string. And then in the end, you can print it. I believe that was your question. Yeah. How do you count the vowels in the string? Yeah. So this would return to you the number of vowels within a specific string. Yeah, that is a good question. Okay. So now we're going to get into some problem solving. So I think Austin actually has to leave early today, but we can definitely get into some of these questions.
So I have to leave in like approximately 2 or 3 minutes. So I guess when I leave, Andrew will just automatically take over. All right. So problem solving thought process. So as usual, we analyze the problem, design a solution, program the solution, and then test the program. All right. So, and once again, this is just a basic guide. So just remember that if you're using an integer, use int input, and then, but if you're using a string, you can omit the int and then just have input and a set of parentheses, and then determine what combination of if statements are needed, and then use a variable or counter to make that calculation / operation. And I think just to add on to that, since we've learned strings and we've also learned for loops, we can also say, since from now on all the problems we're using will require for loops, we can also add a question in there, determine what loop we need to use. So whether a while loop or a for loop will get the job done better. And so I think I'm just gonna read through this problem, and then I think I'm gonna have to go. So I'll hand it off to Andrew. All right. So rotating letters. So I guess the general gist of this question is that we have to determine if certain letters are within a list, because we know that the letters like I, O, S, H, Z, X, and N, if we rotate them by 180 degrees, they still will be the same. So our job is basically to determine if like a sign will be the same after we've rotated it by 180 degrees. So what we can just do really is just check if like each individual character within the input is within the list of I, O, S, H, Z, X, and N. And I think that Alina's question was really good, because this problem, I would say, exactly matches what we did in like the finding vowels problem. So yeah. So do we have any questions from this point on? Okay, there's no questions. All right, so I think I'll just leave it to I'll leave it up to Andrew to finish this thing up.
Did someone have a question, or did someone want to say something? So Henry says, won't that be the same project? Yeah, it basically is the same. Like, do you guys want to do this? Like, because since we do it, or do you guys want to do a different question? Because this one's a little different. This one's trickier. This is the other question on the slides. This one has to do with this one. Okay, so I guess we can do this one. This has this might be definitely be a little harder because okay, so this is, I think you guys probably might not know what DNA and RNA is. So I won't really explain, but they're definitely like within the nucleus, right? DNA is within the nucleus. RNA is a messenger. There are different types of RNA that help us like basically make proteins. So it says that there are a certain number of bases connected in a line, DNA and RNA. And essentially, so in DNA, it contains letters such as A, C, G, but in RNA, it contains A, C, G, U. So it says right here, thymine, which is T, is found in DNA, and uracil, which is U, is found in RNA. Okay, I hope that's not too confusing because you kind of have to know that only like thymine exists only in DNA, and uracil only exists in RNA. Do you guys understand that? And it says that, of course, because of that, adenine, cytosine, and guanine can be present in both DNA and RNA. So essentially, we're gonna have to determine if it is DNA or if it's RNA, DNA, if it can be both or if it's neither. So if you look at the examples here, right? ACT, AGC, those are like only, T is only present in DNA. So that's why the output happens to be DNA. Case, it has A, C, and G, but there's no T or U. T and U are the unique ones that are present in only DNA or RNA. So that's why it says both. Okay. And of course, over here, there's just a bunch of random letters, N, L, O, P, E, J. We know that because it's like that, it's neither, right? Okay. So we can definitely look at some code that would help solve this question. Do you guys know what, I think the first two steps, yeah, is it Jamie? Yeah.
Why did it say Andrew? Andrew is not cool.
That is, I just created that random string. You can create anything. So that was just a random example that I gave, but it's not really, I don't think it's that important. Yeah, you can make it any sentence, I'm pretty sure. For the example with combining strings, right? That could literally be anything. Okay, so I think everyone knows at this point, first thing you have to do is you have to say, like, you have to take inputs, right? So the first one, input, it's an integer. The first one, it's a 6, like it's a number, right? It says the first line contains a number, n. Second line contains n characters. So when it says characters, we automatically know that that it's going to be a bunch of like, you know, like it's a string, right? So we say that. And by the way, if I lag, just let me know because it's only one person here right now. So the way I'm going to do this is a little different. I'm going to set this both as true. I don't know why in a second, because I'm going to have a bunch of if statements. And basically, if one of the conditions isn't true, I'm going to, sorry, okay, someone said I'm lagging. So I'm going to have, I have a bunch of statements here where if certain, I'm going to have a bunch of if statements where if certain cases are like occur, if there's a U, for example, then I will make this false. If there is a, oh no, sorry, if it's a U, I'm going to make DNA false because a U cannot exist in DNA. If there is T, then I'm going to make DNA false, right? So we're just checking for conditions and we're going to make it false or true depending on which condition. Does every question need an input? I don't remember one without an input. So this is a good question. When you have a competition question, usually you will have to have an input. The reason why is if you have an input, and you already know what cases they're going to give you, right? So you can just like tell your code to print out those specific cases. If there's input, then you don't know what number they're going to give you, right? You don't know what string or you don't know what input they're going to give you. It makes the question so much harder. Yeah, so you just like, okay, so essentially if you have an input, it makes the question harder, which is why many questions have inputs. That's basically the reason why they have basically all the questions with CCC questions have inputs. Okay, so I'm gonna have some if statements. For I in range n, and I'm going to say if, okay, the first statement is if C I, so again we're kind of indexing, right? Is equal to U. So if it's equal to U, right? I'm having a bunch of like I saw using pop up in the code area. So it's just that Austin and I are sharing a REPL right now, which is why you can see which is why you can see his name. So if this is the case, then we're gonna make DNA equal false. Else if this is equal to T, then RNA is equal to false. The last case, I believe it's I believe the last case is you can just look at the question. The last case is both, right? So if they're like basically not present at all. Else, then we can say, okay, sorry, I'm trying to look at both chat questions. Okay, so James, you can ask me that question at the end. So RNA equals false, DNA equals false, and break. So if it's so the last condition is basically when it's basically like any letter that's not A, C, G, or U. Because in DNA and RNA, they can only be letters that are A, C, G, or U, right? So not in A, C, G, right? So if it is not one of these letters, then we know that it's just like it's some random, it's not DNA or RNA, right? So which is why we make both of them false and break. So in this case, I'm going to say if DNA is equal to false, no, if DNA is equal to true and RNA is equal to true, then for that case, it means that they both work, which means that I can print both. Else if DNA is equal, if only DNA is equal to true, then I can say print DNA. And else if RNA, if only RNA is equal to true, then I print RNA. And the last case is just simply print neither. Okay. So essentially we have a Boolean. You guys remember what Booleans are, right? Booleans, either there are two like possibilities for a Boolean. Either a Boolean is true or false, right? If it's 1 or 0. So in this case, I'm setting it as true. If it's it says if this is equal to U, because U can only exist in RNA, then we know DNA is false. It cannot be DNA. So if of course, if there's a T, we know that T's only exist in DNA. So we put RNA as false. And we have a letter that's like random and it's not even A, C, or G, then we make both of them false, right? So if both of them are false, then we say neither. So that's essentially the logic behind this. It's just, I think this is definitely a harder question. I'm just gonna copy this, some of these test cases. Yeah, DNA. Both. Yeah, that is true. And neither. Yep. So all the test cases work. So if you know that all the test cases work, you can definitely try to put it in. Submit. So the weird thing about this code is that there are like 32 test cases because they have like lots of cases where they want to test you, and it seems like all of them have worked. So we know that like our code it works. Okay. Do you guys have any questions about how, like, why this works? I feel like it's a little it's straightforward if you think that you're testing for specific cases, and if there are cases that don't match, that match, then you make the other one false and you just change it, right? You have, these are basically just, they help you, they guide you in the sense that it shows you like which one it is, right? Okay, so I guess since we have no questions, we don't really have time for the we just did 2018 contest. Okay, yeah, thanks for telling me. So I was saying that we probably don't have time to go over the last question. So, I mean, like the question that Austin was supposed to do. So we are going to end today's lesson. So these are the questions that we want you to try and go through. If I just go back, these questions right here, these ones. I can give you guys the link for today's slides, so you can search up these questions. Just give them a try, and we would definitely like to see like some code, like just see that you guys have tried, and that would definitely be the best case, and we can definitely like give you guys feedback for your code. So yeah, that is today's lesson. Thanks for coming, and if you guys want, I can give you the link right now if you